Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the OnePlus 7T and see how this specific phone holds up in 2023. Now, I think this is a very interesting phone because it has, aged a little bit better than I think some other phones probably during this time. Now, I think there's some other phones you might want to pick up over these ones, so I will leave some other phones linked down in the description. If you want to pick up those phones from there, you can also help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the OnePlus 7T, this phone honestly still looks very good. When it first came out in 2019, it was a very good looking phone, but I do think it kind of got overshadowed a little bit, basically by the, OnePlus 7T Pro and the OnePlus 7 Pro during that time. So with this specific phone of having this type of screen and display and everything going around it, I think it looked pretty good, and I do think it was kind of a step up from the OnePlus 7 during that time. Now this phone has a 6.55-inch Fluid AMOLED display. It's a 90Hz panel. It's a 1080p display too. And overall, it looks pretty good. There's really not that much to kind of complain about here. Now, you do have the V-shaped hole punch display at the very top. That can be kind of a disappointment for some people. I know for some people they'd rather have a display that doesn't even have a hole punch at all with it, especially when you saw what OnePlus was able to do with the OnePlus 7 Pro. That was actually quite impressive. And then when they made a phone like this, I think it was still okay. I totally don't mind, having a cutout. And in fact, I almost preferred having some sort of cutout like this, because when you actually have a device like a OnePlus 7T, you don't have to worry about the actual camera component going up and down and breaking and all that. I didn't want to deal with that, and luckily we don't really have to deal with it in this specific situation. So with the OnePlus 7 T, I think it totally looks fine. Now on the bottom you have your USB Type-C port, which is great. On the sides, not really much, still a super premium feeling side, and that kind of covers it up there. On the back side, you do have your standard glass back, which feels and looks very good. It still feels like a very premium phone, which I've said for years now. I mean, that's a really good thing you have going for with a phone like the OnePlus 7T. Most OnePlus phones during their time felt very premium, and this was pretty much no exception. Now, you did have your camera setup that was on the top. It was kind of in the center. And one thing I really liked about this camera was that it actually, it may not be the best quality, but it was a very interesting layout. During that time, a lot of devices didn't really have the best looking lens in terms of the way it looked. And I still think even nowadays with the OnePlus 11, I think OnePlus did a good job of making their cameras and their layout stand out a little bit more, even if their cameras weren't the best. So I think that was something that kind of stood out to me as well. So from the outside perspective, although this phone is still lacking basic things like IP certification and wireless charging, at least we still had a pretty good feeling phone that still felt very premium when it came down to it. So from that perspective, I would say it kind of gets a thumbs up for me. Now on top of that, if we're taking a look at the actual camera, setup for the most part, this phone on the back had a triple camera setup. And it was an okay camera at best when it first came out. So it had a 48 megapixel wide angle lens, a 12 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 16 megapixel ultra wide camera. Now on the front, it also had a 16 megapixel wide angle lens. Now one thing I have to kind of state with the OnePlus 7T is that, at least it had that triple camera setup. So that is something that I always like. Having the ability of zooming in and zooming out a lot is a really needed feature, and I'm really happy a phone like the OnePlus 7T was able to have it. Now, that doesn't excuse it for the quality of the camera is the best way I can put it, but it's still really nice to have some sort of camera lenses like this, and I think that in and of itself is a really cool thing. Now, the camera UI I think has gotten better throughout time. I do think it's gotten a little bit better, but during this time it was actually pretty decent as well. And I will say the camera quality has improved throughout time, but during this moment, it really wasn't that great. It was 4K at 60 on the back, which is awesome. It's 1080p at 30 on the front. But during this time, we already had phones like the Samsung Galaxy S10 and the OnePlus 11 Pro. And those phones had arguably some of the best cameras during that time. So it's just one of those things to keep in mind. It's kind of unfortunate, but this phone's camera kind of came at a weird time. If this camera came out a year before, I think that would have been a lot better. But since then, we've had some of the best cameras on any phones, probably the best advancements probably going on in 2019 as well. That's when a lot of manufacturers were putting triple camera setups on their phones. And I think this one was pretty much more in line with something like a Google Pixel 4 during that time, more than like an iPhone 11 Pro or Galaxy S10. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in the software experience standpoint, this phone did run Oxygen OS, which was awesome. Now, we got the versions of Oxygen OS that were actually pretty good. I think since Android 12 or Android 11, it's been a very, very rocky road. But during its time actually getting Oxygen OS, I remember when that version of software was my favorite version. It would be the one I would recommend most people to go ahead and use. And man, I really, really miss that version of software. It was very solid. And looking at it now, it is kind of sad because, I feel like OnePlus has lost their way. When I just bought the OnePlus 11 and I kind of messed around with it, it is very sad that the once, amazing software has now gone down to such a weird version. I don't even know what they're trying to do with it now. With the OnePlus 7T, I do think this version of software is, good. It got software for support for quite a bit of time. It's definitely not the best performing phone of all time in terms of the software experience, but it was more stock than it was not. So I think that was a really cool thing. It had a lot of features built in as well. And I do think at this point, it's very, very okay. Like it stopped at Android 12, which actually is not that even that old. So if you still want to use this phone, you can. It's probably still getting security updates, but it's not going to be getting like next couple versions of Android. So it's kind of outdated, but not really. So kind of take that with a grain of salt, but that's kind of how this phone kind of holds up there. Now in the performance side, this phone has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 Plus chipset with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now that's actually not that bad of amount of RAM to have on a device like this. If you're getting something like a OnePlus 7T, that is, that's not the oldest performing phone. And to be fair, a lot of things you're going to do on this phone are still going to be pretty decent. So to start off, for basic applications like phone calling and texting people, you're going to be fine. But even taking it up a notch to, gaming and going on social media apps and taking, Snapchats and TikTok and all that stuff, that's going to be fine too. This phone is not really going to be showing its age that much. Of course, apps are going to take longer to load than maybe like a, Google Pixel 6 or like a Galaxy S22 or S23, but I do think this phone still has a lot of room to kind of grow there, which is honestly pretty cool. With something like the OnePlus 7T as well, even for heavier intensive games, you're probably going to be okay for how old this phone is. Now, this phone is not going to come close to like a Galaxy S23 with the HN2 chipset or even like a Pixel 7, to be honest. This is definitely an older phone, which is kind of expected as of this point, but in a lot of games nowadays, you can tune down the graphics, you can tell the graphics down if you need to, but also another big thing is that if you need to, you can still play some pretty intensive games on this thing too, which is mostly what I do with a lot of my older Androids laying around. So take that as you will, but that's just kind of one of those things to keep in mind with the OnePlus 7T. Battery life wise, it had a 3800 milliamp hour battery, which is honestly a pretty big size battery I have on a device too. And to kind of sum up my experience with the OnePlus 7T, I do think that this specific device is still a pretty good phone, for the most part. There's just a few things that I kind of complain about it. If you still own it or if you still want to buy it, I guess it's your choice. I wouldn't really recommend buying this phone as your first device. If, I would probably recommend going for like something like a Pixel 6. A Pixel 6a might be a little bit better just because it is kind of newer. It's still supported with software. The Galaxy S22, the S23, if you can swing for some of those devices. But if you want an older one, you can always go for like a Google Pixel 5 that's still supported with software. It's probably going to be a better buy than this thing too. So those are kind of the phones I'd recommend more. So I think this thing is still decent, but because of its lack of software support, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to actually buy this one anymore. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.